Thank you. Eric?
Well, my quote, I guess we have to have a quote, John. No one told you, but you're supposed to have a quote. We've heard about some of the good, we heard some of the bad, and I'm going to talk about the ugly. And the ugly is the bailout. And it's an interesting issue that everyone agreed that the financial system needed to be bailed out at the end of the Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama administration. But the way it was done, I think, was probably a D to a D minus. They get a passing grade because they did save the financial system, but I can't imagine doing it in a poor fashion. What you have to imagine is the negotiations that went on in New York. You have the Treasury basically sitting across from the banks and the investment banks, and the investment banks are saying, you are not going to give us a haircut because we know you have to save us. And the reply of, and I'll put it on Paulson and Geithner, should have been, well, that's true, but we're going to play chicken with you, and maybe we'll let you fail, a couple of you fail, and you'll all lose your $100 million portfolios of stock in your firms. And unfortunately for the American taxpayer, Geithner and Paulson folded up like a cheap pup tent after about 15 minutes. They got all the downside risk of insuring the financial system and none of the upside. That's why Goldman Sachs will earn billions of dollars this year. This firm was worthless. Every Wall Street firm, every large commercial bank was essentially worthless at the point at which the system was saved. So there's two problems with that way of handling it. One is obviously there's a fairness issue. I mean, this is what has made stimulus packages and further bailout measures difficult, is the perceived gross unfairness of the burden falling on all of us, and we're not sharing in any of the upside of the financial entities that have prospered. So there's a fairness issue, and of course there's an efficiency issue. If it's known that the government not only will bail us out, but will bail us out on incredibly generous terms, it's just going to create all sorts of incentives called moral hazard going forward for firms to take these same sort of risks again, get in the same room in the New York Fed, watch the federal government fold after 15 minutes and assume all the downside risk and take none of the upside risk. So bad fairness going backwards, bad incentives going forwards. So I'm here to tell you there are ways to fix this, right? First, let's start with the fairness issue. Something that's been strangely fairly actively discussed over in Britain. There's been a series of articles either in the Financial Times or the Times of London, I don't recall which, about a windfall profits tax on banks and investment banks and other financial firms. Very little, if any, discussion in the United States. We actually have a lot of experience with these taxes in the 20th century. In both world wars, there were windfall profits tax on ammunition makers. In the late 70s, there was a windfall profits tax. In the mid to late 70s, there was a windfall profit tax on oil companies. And contrary to the portrayal of them, they actually worked pretty well. They raised a significant amount of revenue. It was felt that it was fair to tax oil companies in the 70s who benefited from a price that was inflated because of a foreign cartel. Good target. The tax worked because it was a surprise. I guarantee you it would be a surprise to Wall Street if Congress came up with a windfall profits tax. So it won't warp any incentives because they wouldn't have seen this coming. So every once in a while it pays to catch somebody blind. Now, there are some potential legal objections to it. And when I talk windfall profits tax, I'm talking about a very high marginal tax rate on banks and investment banks on the order of 80 to 90% of profits over a certain amount. We'll let Congress quibble over the details. But two potential legal objections, two constitutional objections are, one, it might look like a bill of attainder. So from your high school civics class, you probably don't remember, but Congress cannot pass statutes that look like punishment. The Parliament used to do that over in England. They abused that power, and our founding fathers decided to ban bills of attainder. And two, it might be viewed as a taking of property requiring just compensation, and then you just have to give the money back if it was viewed as a taking. The logic, I mean, the legal mumbo-jumbo is different in either case, but the logic for why both of those challenges to windfall profits tax are weak is twofold. One is they do not focus on individuals. You're not naming names either directly or indirectly. You're merely saying there's actually a fairly large class of people here, both the some of the employees and the stockholders of these financial institutions. So it doesn't look like it's targeting individuals. And second, it's not really punitive. What you're saying is you derived an extraordinary benefit from governmental action. Indeed, your firms were worthless. Any equity you have in this firm, or perhaps your job if you're an employee, was saved by the federal government. We're not taking all of it back. We're just taking a pretty big piece. So I think there would be constitutional challenges. I think they would fail. I think this would go a long way towards enabling the government to engage in what I think is going to be further necessary bailouts and further necessary fiscal stimulus. Right now, both have a bad name, I think largely in part because people are reading about record profits for financial firms who basically hoodwink the government. So that's the retrospective piece, how to fix the unfairness that's resulted from the bailout. The second piece is the incentives going forward. And my proposal for dealing with the incentives going forward is basically General Motors. General Motors went through bankruptcy faster than anyone thought possible. Huge corporation, very complex capital structure, all sorts of creditors, complex issues with the unions. No one thought that you could take General Motors through bankruptcy in 6 weeks, but they did it. And General Motors may sink or swim, but the recapitalization was successful. They will succeed or fail on the merits of the real assets of the business, their factories, their workers, their management. So they changed ownership. That's all bankruptcy is recapitalizing, saying you used to own it, you don't own it anymore, your creditors or your workers or someone else owns it. We need a sort of a even faster mechanism for financial institutions. So going forward, you would basically set up a statutory regime in which financial institutions would be more closely monitored. A government agency like the SEC would have a pretty good idea of their balance sheet on a daily, weekly basis. And when they were bankrupt, they would basically be liquidated almost instantaneously. We know where you are. Today you're bankrupt. We're going to give the shareholders 0, 20, 40%. The bondholders are going to get 60%, and you're going to open up tomorrow. The economy does not need certain people to own these firms. The economy needs these firms operating. I mean, the bailout was necessary because the finance industry is crucial. It's different than other industries. I mean, look at us. We're all employed by students who take out loans. So the financial industry is the lubricant that runs higher education in America. So there's no question it's special. You're going to need those institutions functioning. There's really no need to save a certain set of owners. Now, the exception to that, the complex piece of the puzzle, is a lot of the capital of financial institutions is human capital. And you might have to be a little careful about incentives for those people to stay. So that's kind of the tricky piece of designing sort of a very quick bankruptcy. You don't care about shareholders leaving. You don't care about bondholders leaving. You're going to have some ownership structure at the end of the day. It's going to want to maximize profits. You are going to need people to stay in the industry. So I think I'll stop there.